want to start this morning by reading something from the very beginning of the chapter in this book that we're studying together, 7 Days of Spiritual Evolution, the Genesis of Personal Transformation. And I want to read what Kent says at the beginning of this chapter about water. As I think I've said before, he is wise, and I think he also has the soul of a poet. These words are quite beautiful. He writes, "Water is wondrous, beautiful, magical. Morning mist rises up to meet the sun and falls again to love the land and quench its thirst. It cleans away the dust from the leaves and grime from the cities. It is the rolling river, the throbbing sea, and the delicate crystalline snowflake that floats down to the ground. It is the sustainer of all life. The many manifestations and functions of water offer clues about its symbolic meaning." Denise read from the scriptures 2 places within the Bible where we hear these clues about the meaning of water. First, from the passage from Isaiah, where we hear that as the rain and the snow comes down from the heavens, so do the thoughts of God. The thoughts of God that are higher and more distinct than the thoughts of humankind. We heard the parable of Jesus at the well. Actually, it wasn't a parable, it was a story of Jesus at the well with the woman from Samaria. And when he offers her the water that will become a spring gushing up to eternal life. Jesus often speaks of this living water that is within and that we can receive as we come to God. There are, of course, the waters of baptism that we use to remember the way in which the Lord is always washing us clean, bringing us into this new life. There's that beautiful river of the water of life in the stories from Revelation with its bright, crystal, flowing water coming from the throne of God. There are wonderful, beautiful images of water throughout Scripture. And in these images where we see water as taking on this kind of perfect, beautiful presence, we are connected to water as this divine truth, this holy, pure, perfect truth that God is offering us. As Kent said, it is the sustainer of all life. Our bodies are made up of water. Our world is made up of water. When NASA scientists explore other planets and wonder if life might be there, they are looking for the presence of water. But we also know that as much as water has this pure and holy, perfect place in our lives, we know that in reality on this planet, water is not always pure. I think that in the last week, we've had some of the first beautiful snows, but the snowstorms we've had earlier than this are those snowstorms that quickly turn brown and mushy under our feet. Water can easily become polluted. And we know that when water is polluted, when it is not pure, when it is not safe to drink, it can be harmful and incredibly destructive. On this day of creation, on this second day of creation, when God creates this dome in the midst of the waters, separating the waters above from the waters below, I can't help but think about the water cycle. I have small children, so we're always learning new things about how water moves and changes. This water cycle where all the water upon the earth eventually evaporates, goes up into the sky, rains back to the earth, goes back into the sky over and over and over again. If this water cycle were not a part of our earth, we would not be here. The waters of the earth would just be a big murky soup. It's this cycle of the water going back up into the sky and coming back again that allows it to be purified. to be useful, to become that crystalline river once again. And in this same way, on this day of creation, as it pertains to our spiritual lives, if we do not continually allow our thoughts, our beliefs, our ways of understanding ourselves and our neighbors, our practices and habits, if we do not continually allow our understanding of the truth to be taken up into the heavens, to be purified, our lives, our understandings of ourselves and of the world will remain, as Swedenborg puts it, one dim, confused whole, a murky soup. Day 2 signifies the emergence of our awareness that we have two parts of ourselves, that we have an inner self and we have an external self, that there is this inner plane of knowing that transcends the knowledge that we receive from the external world. Day 2 signifies a new ability to look up, or we could say to look in for the truth. To not be totally immersed in what we perceive from our senses, from our bodily desires, from the pushes and pulls of the external world, but to have the ability to observe the distinction between the truth above the dome and the truth below, to in a way observe ourselves, and to begin to think about, to begin to embrace and understand what truths we hold that might be emerging from heaven, and what those lesser truths might be that we cling to from the world. I want to read something else from Kent's chapter. This is on page 71, where he attempts to define truth. We talk about truth a lot in our tradition, and I know I talk about it a lot, and I think sometimes I know what it is. But truth, as we might imagine, especially divine truth, the spirit of truth, the logos, the word that we talk about within these walls, this truth is much bigger and unlikely something we can just come to through deduction or reasoning. And I think that's important to remember, because sometimes I associate the word truth with only my left brain. That's my right brain. Only my left, I forget which way it goes, but only my left brain, only my ability to deduce and to reason. But truth in a divine sense is much bigger than either hemisphere of our brain. And Kent offers this. He interprets divine truth to mean a spiritual perspective based on knowledge of God that transcends and liberates us from a merely natural perspective. I like this interpretation. It's obviously not giving like the full story of, okay, this is God's truth. But it's saying that God's truth, divine truth, is always going to be able to lift us out of ourselves, lift us out of our worldly perspectives. It's always going to be opening us up and helping us to see this higher divine perspective. I wonder if you are able in your own life, or if you have been at different times in your life, able to gain perspective on yourself. As I was preparing for this message today, I was remembering an instance in my own life when I had kind of an aha moment of gaining some perspective on what was going on inside. I've always been a journaler since I was about 12. I don't always keep it up every day, but I have stacks and stacks of them, so I can consider myself someone who journals. And at one particularly challenging time in my 20s, I was journaling about some conflicting feelings I was having inside. I was struggling with identity and who I really was. And just really spontaneously, I started journaling about all of these different competing desires and impulses inside myself by giving them all a personality. And I chose the characters from the Winnie the Pooh series. Does everybody know about Winnie the Pooh? So you know about Tigger and Piglet, Pooh, Eeyore. Oh yes, don't forget Eeyore, he's very important. Yeah, I found that all these characters just were wonderful symbols for what was going on in me. You know, the Piglet part of me that just wanted to please everybody and always do the right thing and always working very busily. The Tigger part that just wanted to play and have fun. The Eeyore part that just thought everything was kind of a waste of time and nothing was ever going to work out. And then the Pooh part, you know, that was sort of all very zen about everything and just eating honey and enjoying life. And I wrote this long story, and as I was writing, I thought, oh, I'm getting there. I'm gonna figure out which one is me. And I was writing, and they were having conversations, and I was like thinking, okay, I'm getting at, you know, what are the parts of me that are good? What are the parts of me that are holy? Who am I in all of this mess? And it really came almost suddenly, like an epiphany. And I started writing that there was this booming voice from the sky, God, saying, I'm not any of these people. You're not any of these people. I'm bigger and higher than all of these personality traits that drive you and that run your life. And I'm not any of these parts, but I'm also in all of these parts. That there's goodness within all of these different pulls and pushes, all of these different desires, sometimes to please, sometimes to play, sometimes to just sit and eat honey. That one wasn't necessarily better or worse than the other, but I wasn't one solid thing, and I couldn't necessarily just through my journaling determine clearly who I was. That I was emerging. And that God's truth, God's life was much bigger than all of these pieces. And after the booming voice came in, I had such a lightness in me, a sense of perspective, a sense of understanding that I could have all of these competing parts and it wasn't going to be the end of me. That they could all be, and that there could be heavenly aspects of them. There could be waters above the dome within those parts of me, and there could be waters below. And I could do my best to discern between the two. And that God would always be there amidst all of it and above all of it and within all of it, helping me to move forward. Because that's what this creation story is all about. It's not about finishing a process. It's not about arriving and declaring our holiness. It's about engaging in a process to get closer and closer to God's truth. Never all the way there, but closer. And that process requires not only that immediate dawning of light, that aha moment, but that then requires the work of gaining some perspective, some practical perspective around our own lives. What are the thoughts that come into my mind and feed me and help me to feel secure, that help me feel confident and able to move forward in my life? And what are those thoughts and understandings that come in that just want to weigh me down, that just want to get in my way and stop me from growing towards the truth? I wonder if each of you have your own practices for gaining a bit of this perspective. Maybe you journal yourselves. Meditation, as we know, is a wonderful practice for starting to look at and see that we are not our thoughts, but that they are moving through us and we can choose. Kent writes a lot in this chapter about cognitive behavioral therapy, which is a way in our modern world where therapists have been trained to help us sort out what are the thoughts that are healthy and good for me, and what are the thoughts that are old, that are coming from a much lower place, and that I can change. Maybe you get some perspective coming to worship and sitting in this beautiful sanctuary, listening to the readings of the Word, celebrating the sacraments where within we realize that there is something much bigger going on within these earthly elements. There are many, many ways to gain perspective, and I believe that God has given us a diverse array of options for how to connect with the truth. And if you notice, none of what I've named so far has to do with in-depth study of a book or a research project. That may be your way, but I definitely don't think it's the only way. I think God's truth is speaking to us right now, and there isn't necessarily a book out there we have to discover before that truth begins to come. I invite you, as you continue with this week and prepare for next week when we will move on to the third day, I'd invite you to consider how you experience the waters above the dome and the waters below. Perhaps take some of Kent's suggestions for the practices that he outlines in this book, how to observe ourselves a little bit more and make choices about how we embrace truth and how we seek to come to a deeper truth. And I will invite you now, as we prepare to celebrate the Lord's Holy Supper, that this sacrament is a way to experience this distinction and to see we don't just come to this table, I'm guessing, because you are physically hungry and thirsty. If that's your motivation, you will be sadly disappointed because there's only a very small glass of wine and a very small piece of bread. But we come to this table because we are spiritually hungry and we spiritually thirst. We want that nourishment of God that only the Lord can provide. And in coming together at this table and sharing this meal with one another, we are filled.